The tension in the streets was palpable, Juliette found. People were gathering around, some dressed in nothing more than rags, others in their finest garb, more fit for ballrooms than the dirty alleys of this city. She could smell food getting grilled, heavy smoke and the odor of perfumes worn by the richer ladies that mingled with the poor masses, all yearning for the spectacle that was soon to unfold. Juliette pushed through a small crowd and out of the cramped alley. Thousands of people were standing around, waiting, laughing, and even singing on this sunny day. But they couldn't hide the tension. It was everywhere. In every laugh, in every word, in every note sung. The city was a powder keg, her friend Penelope had told her, not even a month ago. And Juliette was sure that that was the truth. She could see it even today. Despite no one protesting right now, no brawls or riots taking place, the way the people looked at each other, and especially the guards posted seemingly everywhere, there still was this anger lingering in the air. It was a period of unrest after all, Juliette thought, and moved around a larger group of people who were arguing with each other. One name could be heard out of almost every mouth. Renard. The name of the main attraction. The one condemned to die today. Juliette turned away from the group and felt a shiver as she spotted a massive, bearded man balancing two young children on his shoulders, moving in the same direction as her. They would be watching the execution as well, of course. That was the reason this mass of people were gathering. They were treating it like a festival almost. For a few hours, the unrest would stop. Well, as long as everything went down without a hitch. In this atmosphere, a botched execution would instantly transform the people here into a rabid mob. She hadn't seen it herself, but had heard of stuff like that. Even normal, content people could completely lose their minds if something like that happened. There were stories about a mob of onlookers storming the platform and killing the executioner after he had messed up. Riots, destroying houses and businesses. Even a few stories about the military suppressing such things, which always ended in a bloodbath. Why had she come here again? She asked herself. The answer stayed the same as before. Because that's what one did. It was a reason to leave the house with company one enjoyed. A distraction from the day-to-day problems. Her friend Penelope was waiting for her already. Juliette pushed on, down the road leading to the square where everyone was slowly gathering. She could see people she recognized from her daily life. A few customers and some beggars who were now coming together in groups, laughing and drinking. There was the man who owned the pub, standing by his wife and daughter. Here, the priest, bearing his knowing smile as he surveyed the group. It really did feel like a festival. Juliette finally reached the end of the road, stepped out from between two groups of people, and caught her first glimpse of the square that was already filled to the brim with onlookers. Right in the middle was the wooden platform built in just 24 hours, and on it, the instrument of the execution for today. A guillotine. The mere sight of it sent shivers down her spine. She could see the old, weathered wood that framed it, the rope that seemed far darker than any she would normally see. and the blade, for now resting at the bottom, soon to be drawn up. There were some guards up on the platform, silently watching the mob while holding their weapons at the ready. Juliette recognized their uniforms immediately. Those weren't the normal City Watch people that were known to pester civilians. No. The master of the palace guards must have sent them here to make sure this Renard guy would meet his untimely end. Juliette realized that she had stopped inadvertently as someone pushed her from behind and almost made her stumble. She heard a mumbled, half-hearted apology, then glanced back and could see 3 faces, now all looking up at the guillotine. It was drawing their attention as well. This instrument of justice, as some people called it. But justice had nothing to do with it. It was nothing more than a way to kill people, Juliette thought. At least it was quick and relatively clean. Not like the gallows or, even worse, executioners wielding a giant sword. She shivered, shook her head, then started pushing through the crowd again. All the people were staring up at the platform, and Juliette could see the strange glimmer in their eyes. Like they could hardly wait for it all to start. It felt wrong. Macabre. Somehow, the people here, standing in the square, seemed completely bewitched by the spectacle, even though it hadn't started yet. What would the mob be like once the convicted stepped onto the platform? Juliette shuddered at the thought. "Julie!" a voice shouted from somewhere behind her, breaking through the murmurs of the people in the crowd. She recognized it immediately and turned around, only to see her friend already reaching out to her from between 2 big and burly men. Juliette grabbed hold of the hand and could see the 2 between them making way before her friend pulled her into a hug. "I'm so glad I found you. Quick, we have to move. The place is full already, and I fear in a few minutes we won't even be able to reach the house anymore." Juliette nodded and followed her friend as she pushed away the 2 guys to walk back toward the edge of the square. Well, her friend had promised her that she had gotten them a great spot, after all, but had kept it a surprise for now. She didn't mind, if she was honest. The whole spectacle wasn't really her thing, and she had only come out to meet with Penelope after all. Not being able to witness the whole thing was fine with her. But, knowing her friend, she kinda expected something else. The woman pulled her along through groups of people all staring up at the platform and toward one of the houses surrounding the square. "Quick!" she ordered, and Juliette finally managed to keep pace with her. Penelope only turned around once they reached the wall, and the smile on her face was so bright. Juliette couldn't help but get infected by it. "I always wanted to do that," she heard her friend exclaiming, then turning and knocking at the door of the house. It opened just a tiny crack. "The Marquis sent us," her friend hissed, which made Juliette shoot her a confused glance. Suddenly, the door opened inward, and what looked like a child waved at them to enter quickly. Juliette got pulled along again, into the darkness of the building, before the child through the entrance shut behind them, not letting anyone else enter. Penelope looked back at her with this wide grin, then gave her a wink and pulled her up the stairs. "You know a Marquis?" Juliette asked, incredulously, which earned her a loud laugh. "No, but we needed a password, and that was the best thing I could come up with. Her friend replied, while still ascending the stairs and letting go of her hand. They walked up one floor after another, and Juliette began to feel this strange trepidation building in her chest. What was the plan here? The house seemed empty, yet her friend was clearly heading to the upper floors. Maybe someone would be up there? She looked up and could see that there was only one floor between them, and what was essentially the ceiling of the stairwell. But her friend didn't stop, not even at the door to the uppermost floor. Instead, she pulled her up the next flight of stairs that pointed to a small ring hanging from the ceiling. The attic. Juliette wasn't sure how she should even react. Did Penelope want to bring her to some dark place to do what exactly? She stopped and watched her friend pick up a long wooden stick with a metal hook at its end. Lifting it up, she pulled at the ring, and slowly the hatch opened and a ladder extended downwards. "Come," she heard her friend say, but hesitated for a second. Shouldn't she speak up now? What was the plan here? But her friend was still smiling so brightly that Juliette simply sighed, then followed her up and into the dark attic. As soon as her head reached through the hole, she expected a cloud of dust and a musty stench, but to her surprise, the attic smelled like nothing at all. It was completely empty, yet clean. People must have been up here hardly more than a day ago to remove the cobwebs and dust to make it presentable. But for what? There were only 2 small windows letting in a tiny bit of light, but there was no way one could watch anything from up here. "Almost there," she heard Penelope whisper, who now seemed to be glowing with excitement. Juliette, still shaking her head, stepped up the ladder and then stopped as she watched her friend walking over to one of the windows. She could hear the crowd from here already. "I got us the best spots, just like I promised." Her friend opened the window, and the breeze that blew in smelled of the same things as the air down at the square. Meat, alcohol, and tobacco. "You coming?" Juliette watched as her friend put her hands on the frame of the window and pulled herself up and out. For a single moment, she thought her friend was about to do something monumentally stupid. She was behind her, wanting to hold her back before she could even finish that thought. But as she looked out, she could see the woman still smiling brightly and now extending a hand to help her up. Juliette grabbed hold of the frame to lift herself out of the window, then her friend's hand to finally get out. An even stronger breeze blew past her as suddenly the noises of the crowd so far below became much louder, much more intense. She looked down at the shingles of the roof, where someone had put down a blanket and a basket. "Best seats, right?" Penelope asked, but Juliette still couldn't quite comprehend what was happening. All around her, on every single roof, people were sitting and watching the show. It was like one of those opera houses, those box seats high up above the crowd that normal people would never be allowed to enter. "Don't worry, you won't fall," she heard her friend say, and felt her tug at her wrist and let herself be sat down on the blanket. "I brought wine, so we can enjoy the show in peace." Juliette didn't have eyes for the basket her friend was now putting down between them. The view was breathtaking. Down below she could see the crowd, and amidst a mass of people, the platform. From up here, she could see every single person on it. All the guards were still keeping watch on the mob that seemed to slowly be swaying from side to side. This really was the perfect spot to watch from. Her friend had gone above and beyond what she had expected. And even if normally she wouldn't be that interested in the whole thing, she couldn't deny that her heart started beating faster now at the thought. She would see it, clearly. The moment that man would die. A shiver ran through her whole body. "Isn't it great?" she had her friend ask, and could do nothing but simply nod in response. Never before in her life had she felt like this, so far above the rest of the people of this city. "So, how long until it starts?" Juliette asked, still completely transfixed by the view. Her friend was chuckling softly beside her, and pulled out something that looked like a pocket watch. "Usually, about an hour. But you know how those things are. The crowd is extra rowdy today, so bringing the guy safely to the platform is gonna take some time. But I packed us enough food and wine to last us through the whole day." Juliette nodded again and let her gaze wander over the crowd. The place was filling up more and more with every passing minute. Soon, there wouldn't even be enough room for anyone else to squeeze themselves into the crowd. No wonder Penelope had dragged her here in such a hurry. And that guy, Renard, what's he done? She knew that her friend was always far better informed about the goings-on of this city. Juliette herself didn't much care for gossip and rumors, but she could rely on Penelope to filter out the worst bullshit, then tell her the truth. A soft chuckle rang in her ears before her friend finally answered. "You want the official version? Or what he really did?" Juliette just nodded. She couldn't stop looking at the crowd below. "Officially, he committed crimes against the king and crown. So, treason? The guy held speeches everywhere for years. He started as a wandering preacher, I think. But as soon as he came to the city, he stayed. At first, he was talking about normal stuff. You know, saving the souls of the people, how to live with your neighbors, that being kind is the most important thing, you know, like that. But something changed about him a year or so ago. More and more, he started to put the blame on the rich and the powerful. Where at first, he was talking about people sharing food with the needy. He started to say that the biggest problem was the almost daily banquets in the palace. While some people freeze out in the streets, big villas are heated all year round. He spoke about how the city itself is infected, how the sickness had already spread throughout it, about how it needs a cleansing fire. You know, he really was very good at that oration stuff. I went to 2 of his speeches. And to be honest, the atmosphere there almost frightened me. Juliette looked at her with the wide eyes for a moment. I know. Just don't tell anyone what I told you right now. Otherwise, you might have to watch the next execution alone from up here, while I truly get the best spot, if you know what I mean. Her friend was smiling, winking, but Juliette couldn't even answer her, which made Penelope continue. What should I say? The first time I went there was with some guy I was seeing back then. It was a normal gathering, out in the open. The second time, though, well, we met in a basement close to the slums, and the people were angry before he even started the speech. It was very nice to look at, by the way. And the moment he began talking, I could feel the people hanging at his every word. There was this feeling of rage building in the crowd. I could see people clenching their fists as Renard started going on and on and on about how if things weren't given freely, they should be taken forcefully. Yeah, I think that was what made the authorities take note of him. Maybe they were afraid he wanted to start a revolution? Well, whatever. He's gonna die today anyway, but I don't know if his followers are planning something. Maybe that's why the palace guards are stationed down there. Juliette looked more closely at the crowd. There were some people who weren't swaying with the rest, while others had formed groups and were talking. Some were completely focused on the platform. Was that what she had noticed as she had walked into the square? His followers? If that really was the case, there was a whole bunch of them down there waiting for something. Juliette felt herself shivering and hugged her shoulders. This one might turn out worse than she had expected. Well, at least they were up here, where they wouldn't get trampled no matter what happened. Here, take a step. I sadly forgot the glasses. She heard her friend say, felt a hand on her shoulder, then the wine bottle getting pressed against her skin. Juliette took her sip before handing it back to her friend. She felt as if the atmosphere was changing. The laughing and singing down on the streets sounded off now. You think there's gonna be trouble? Juliette asked, and didn't have to look at her friend to know the answer before she could even reply. The silence that lingered between them for a few seconds was enough. Well, at least we're up here, away from the crowd, right? Penelope sounded tense, far more than what she would normally expect. She wanted to give a reply to lighten the mood, but just at that moment, the first shout rang out. It was coming from one of the side roads, and Juliette could see people moving into the square in a hurry now. The procession had started, she realized. Somewhere up that road, a whole bunch of soldiers were dragging the condemned toward the square. Usually, one would hear cheering or curses, but not today. In this strange atmosphere, a single shout rang out again. All Juliette could hear was the voice of a man telling the crowd to make way. They're in a hurry, Penelope whispered into her ear, and she nodded. Someone must have realized how bad this crowd might get, and had started the whole process early to stop the mob from taking action. Whatever that would be. People were getting pushed out of the road, and suddenly, Juliette caught a glimpse of a shining helmet in the crowd for the first time. A soldier, heading the procession. The crowd parted as the man pushed forward, and behind him, more and more uniforms appeared. They were walking in lockstep through the mob that now fell utterly silent. Normally, people would be throwing stuff at the convicted, rotten food or whatever beverage was at hand. But not today. No. They were letting them pass, while the man in front still screamed at them to make way. It was strange, abnormal. And in these circumstances, anything off from the norm felt much more dangerous. If the whole city was a powder keg, the mob here might just be dry tinder, waiting for a single spark. I think we should leave, Juliette whispered, but her friend immediately grabbed her by the shoulder. We can't. If we want to, we'd have to go through the square, and I'm not letting either of us step a foot on the ground right now. She could feel a shiver running through her friend's hand. Well, at least she wasn't the only one who could feel it. Juliette grabbed her friend's hand to comfort herself and watched as the procession slowly entered the square fully. In the midst of the soldiers, she could see a figure dressed in rags. Long, black hair glistened in the sun, and even with a bowed head, the man looked much taller than the rest of the people. Renard, she whispered, and felt a sudden chill as the person down there turned his head. So this was the man they would execute today. She could feel something from him, a presence rarely seen outside of royal parades. This man was dangerous, she thought, and felt a shiver in her bones. The procession went on. They pushed through the crowd and toward the platform, and yet no one threw a single thing at the convicted or even shouted a single word of insult at him. They were all as enthralled by him as she was. What was he like when you saw him? Juliette heard herself posing a question she hadn't really wanted to ask. Impressive? He was great with words. But his aura, when he stood up, was just something else. Especially that second time. As I said, the crowd made me afraid, but not for my own safety. I just had this feeling that I might lose myself in them if I stayed. All it took was one glance down at the imposing figure, and Juliette knew exactly what her friend meant. There were stories about priests whipping up crowds with fervor when the Crusades had started. Only his war wasn't one far away against another nation. She watched as the last few rows of people parted and the procession finally reached the platform. All the palace guards on there were on high alert. She could see them grabbing the handles of their halberds and reacting to every single move the crowd made. Even they were anticipating trouble. As the first of the soldiers walked up the wooden steps, the sound his footfalls made echoed across the now completely silent square. This was wrong. Every single fiber in her body screamed. Even though at first she thought the crowd might get too rowdy today, watching them standing there in absolute silence made alarm bells go off in her mind. This wouldn't end well. She wanted to run away. It couldn't. Juliette felt the hand she still held onto shiver and looked on as the condemned followed up the steps, with the chains binding him to the guards and soldiers now visible. One of the brightly uniformed men up on the platform walked over to the guillotine and started pulling on the rope that lifted the blade. The noise washed over the silent crowd. Juliette had to force herself to stop watching the construction and concentrate on the man this was all about. 2 hands were holding him by the shoulders, pushing and dragging him to the center of the platform. And as he finally raised his head, she caught a real glimpse of the man standing down there. His skin was pale as a ghost, and there were cuts visible beneath the rags they had clothed him in. The darkest eyes Juliette had ever seen wandered across the mob, then up the houses, and lingered on her for a short moment. Her heart almost stopped. Even though he was still bound, standing in front of what would in a mere matter of minutes become his instrument of death, this man down there seemed completely calm, silent, just like the crowd. He blinked once, then twice, before the corners of his lips turned up in a smile. "Oh, God!" Juliette heard her friend groan. A single drop of blood was running down the unshaven chin of the man, and that sight almost made her scream. Something was wrong with his mouth. Black lines were crisscrossing the skin of his lips. Juliette almost screamed. She would have if her friend's fingers hadn't suddenly burrowed into her shoulder. They had sewn his mouth shut. The crowd seemed to notice it as well. A low murmur broke out beneath them, and Juliette felt it more than she could hear it. "You find yourself here, condemned for the crime of speaking out against your God, king, and country." The voice of a man standing close by on the platform suddenly rang out. The stack of papers he was holding in his hands was shaking. Juliette could see it even from up here. "For those acts, you have been condemned to the punishment of death by beheading." The crowd was shifting. People were slowly swaying, which made it look like waves were washing over the square. With a dull sound, the blade of the guillotine reached the top of the construction, and the man who had pulled it up handed the rope over to someone wearing a black hood. Juliette's lungs hurt, and she realized that she had stopped breathing. Her heart was beating so fast that she thought she might faint. The fingers of her free hand were almost burrowing into the shingles of the roof. "They have to stop this," she heard her friend whisper, and could do nothing but nod. This was all wrong. Everything, from the reaction of the crowd to the condemned himself. "Do you have any last words? Speak them now." The man down there looked out over the crowd as his mouth turned into a strangely deformed grin. Blood was trickling from his sewn-shut lips, running down his chin and dripping onto the rags he was wearing. There was no fear in his eyes, Juliette found. He still seemed so calm, so in control. "Then so be it," the man with the papers exclaimed, and for a single moment she noticed the condemned's eyes looking in on someone in the crowd. He winked as another few drops of blood fell from him and hit the wooden boards of the platform. 2 people grabbed him by the shoulders and dragged him forward. They put him on his knees without a single ounce of resistance, then stuck his head in place before fastening it with a board. "Don't!" Penelope hissed, but her low voice got swallowed by the breeze. Juliette looked down over the crowd and could see each and every one of them waiting while they held their breath in anticipation. This was terrible. A calamity was about to break out. Why couldn't the men on the platform feel it? Was it just a sense of duty overriding their instincts? The people who had pushed the condemned to his knees were now stepping aside, and Juliette could see the man who had spoken give the executioner a nod. Beside her, Penelope wept softly. Beneath, the crowd looked on in silence. A breeze blew past, pulling along the smell of blood. It was an omen. Juliette could almost feel the silence in her bones as time seemed to stop. This was a precipice they were all standing on, and the acts of the men on the platform would pull them down. She could see the man with the hood letting go of the rope, the blade so high above shaking, then falling down. A single thud echoed around the square, and a head with long black hair rolled over the platform, spilling blood on the planks along the way. No one stopped it. No one moved. They all watched in horror as the head with the sewn-shut mouth rolled, and then fell and disappeared in the front row of the crowd. It was like the city itself was holding its breath until it couldn't any longer. A single pavement stone flew out from the mass of people and hit the frame of the guillotine, where blood was now pooling from the headless body. The sound it gave off seemed to finally break the spell. Juliette felt Penelope clinging to her as the mob rushed forward. People were now howling as soldiers lifted their weapons and then got pelted with rocks. That was pandemonium. Some were trying to pull themselves up onto the wooden construction. Juliette screamed as she watched one of the palace guards stabbing with his halberd from the edge of the platform. Heard someone cry in pain, then saw 6 hands grabbing hold of the weapon and pulling it down. More pavement rocks hit the people standing up there. She could see the man who had spoken going down and blood shooting from his head as a second stone hit him in the side. People on the platform were shouting at the mob and each other, begging for help. More and more of the mob climbed up, while the back rows kept hurtling stones at the guards. It was chaos, pure and simple. The one soldier who had led the procession was standing there by the edge of the platform, his sword drawn, hacking down at people trying to get to him. Juliette could see the panic in his eyes. He knew exactly what was about to happen when, not if, the mob finally managed to get to him. A hand grabbed him by his ankle, and he wasn't quick enough to get it off. Juliette heard his scream bellow out as he lost his balance, and 2 more hands found a hold on his armor, dragging him from the platform into the crowd. Turning away, she hugged Penelope, who was crying herself. Even though she couldn't watch it any longer, there was no way to stop the sounds from reaching her ears. People screaming in pain and rage, stones pelting armor, and sometimes bare skin. A howl, deep and dark, coming out of thousands of mouths in unison. They were killing everyone who wore the uniform and tearing apart the platform in the process. Wood was breaking, nails were being ripped out, and all the while the people screamed in anger. She heard glass shattering and immediately turned back around to look. While most of the mob was still in the process of destroying the guillotine and the platform, parts of it started to spread out, throwing rocks into windows. Juliette could smell something. Smoke. It was just a tiny whiff before she suddenly saw it. 2 houses over, black fumes bellowed out of the lowest floor. They were setting fire to the buildings. Juliette heard a terrible crash from right beneath her. A cry as someone burst in the door. The sound of glass shattering. The scent of oil. People were rushing to each and every house, throwing buckets through windows, then torches after that. She pulled Penelope up by her shoulders and raced toward the window as the first wisp of smoke came out of the attic. They were burning it down. Everything, the whole city, had planned for something like that. There was no way to stop the fire once it broke out. Not with the mob in the streets. Penelope's hand pulled her back from the open window as a cloud of acrid smoke poured out and up toward the sky. Juliette staggered and looked down at the people. They didn't realize or didn't care. All they wanted was to burn this city down. She knew. But further toward the center, where the mob had already dispersed, she could see it. The head lying on the cobblestone of the square. His eyes were open, as if he was watching. The mouth, sewn shut, was still grinning, as if he reveled in the fire he had started.